We are live.
Hey, everybody, welcome. I'm very excited about tonight's guest. We have Mike Siegel here from Texas District 10. You may or may not know, I'm a Texan. I was born and raised in Houston. My mother was born and raised in Houston. I have family there. And the Texas that I grew up in was very progressive. It was a Democratic state when I was growing up. And Lyndon Johnson, a lot of people probably don't know Lyndon Johnson, who was, of course, a Texas senator, and then he was president of the United States after having been vice president under JFK and so forth, was obviously and will forever, I think, be associated with the horror of the Vietnam War. But the tragic irony of Johnson is that on the domestic front, he was a very progressive president. The Great Society, the War on Poverty, he signed civil rights legislation, Voting Rights Act, and so forth. So I was raised with the likes of that. I was raised not only with a family that was very progressive, but we had some real progressive giants: Ramsey Clark, Barbara Jordan, Sissy Farenthold, and of course the ever great Jim Hightower, who I saw not too long ago in Austin at a rally for Bernie Sanders. So Mike Siegel, who is running in Texas District 10, is part of a legacy, a political legacy in Texas that I know very, very well. And when Texas, most people just think of it as such a red state, but as in a lot of states, you have blue cities. Houston is blue. Dallas even now is blue. Austin is blue, and it's that rural urban thing. But we all know Texas is purple. Texas is getting bluer and bluer. And even when it was in its most red, there were still a lot of progressives in Texas, and I know about progressives in Texas. Progressives in Texas are really progressive. I'm going to introduce you to one right now, Mike Siegel from Texas District 10. Mike, welcome. I'm so grateful that you're here. Hey, I'll need you to
Thanks so much,
unmute
Marianne.
yourself. Hi.
Beautiful introduction. Thank you for setting the stage and reminding folks of the beating populist progressive heart. I just did an event on Saturday with the legendary Jim Hightower. He's a part of this campaign. And one
You
other
showed us all how to do it, Mike.
Oh, I know. And just there's nothing in the middle of the road but yellow lines and dead armadillos, as he said.
That's right. And of course, behind you, you have the banner of the Texas Blue Bonnets. So
right.
let's go right back into the reality of why we're all here. Michael McCall is one of the most conservative Republicans in the House of Representatives. He has been there since 2004. And you got real close to him last time. You got much closer than most people would have thought possible. The race was deemed by the Democratic establishment not even worth running. And of course, this is something that I have a lot of strong feelings about, Mike. Lyndon Johnson, when he signed the Civil Rights Act, said, "We just lost the South for a generation." But he didn't say for 50 years. He didn't say for 55 years. And so the way the Democratic Party, in my mind, made such a strategic blunder, surrendering, just taking up troops and going home and not even helping, as I believe they should, people like you, when people like you are the winning ticket. So you came close last time. You're in a runoff now, but you did very, very well against the runoff opponent. So you're sitting well, although as you told me earlier, you can't take for granted. Tell me how you're going to win. Now, you're talking about Austin, some of the suburbs around Austin, all the way through to some of the suburbs in Northwest Houston.
That's right.
Okay, tell us how you're going to do it, how you're going to beat McCall. Why this time that you weren't able to last time?
I mean, we're bigger and better this time, but really the heart of it is people power. And it's putting forward a vision, a progressive program that speaks to the needs of the people, that meets the scale of the crises we are facing right now. We're in a racial justice crisis, an economic crisis, a health crisis, a Trump crisis. And people want to hear big solutions because it's not just about meeting the Republicans in the middle. You don't want to go halfway to fascism, right? You want to really articulate a progressive vision. And so the way I'm winning is by building a movement that connects labor unions, people of color, progressive Latino groups and Black groups. We've got the Sunrise Movement, these young environmentalists that are involved, Democratic activists. And really it's about going all across the district, letting folks know that we're here to fight for them. We're not just going to ask for your vote on election day, but when the students at Prairie View A&M and historically Black college were told that they wouldn't be able to vote on campus last cycle, we showed up. I actually had a staffer who was arrested when we were complaining about this issue, and we shined a spotlight and made sure those students could vote. And so on all sorts of issues, whether it's clean air, clean water, fighting to keep hospitals open, making sure we have adequate infrastructure, flood control, we're letting folks we're going to know that we're going to fight for them. And that's how we build that trust, that we're not just kind of cynical politicians asking you to support me with a last second bombardment of ads and TV and so forth. We're trying to build a movement that shows up for people year round during the crisis, non-election years and during the election time.
What has happened that makes this change possible in a state like Texas? Where's the change? Is it in people's hearts? Is it in people's circumstances? Are Texans beginning to lose their attachment to the illusion that the Republican Party is the party of the common man? What's going on there?
I think it's all of those. It's demographic shifts. It's the younger folks coming up and being more assertive, being able to say things like, I support a Green New Deal, even though this is big oil country, right? But we can't have Houston flooding every year. We can't have Hurricane Harvey every year. And so we got to do something to protect our climate. And, I think there's a lot of history, as you mentioned. One thing you didn't mention is that the congressman for the Texas 10th was Lyndon B. Johnson. And so we're going to
really. No,
I mean, it was a slightly different map. They gerrymandered it, but this is, we're going to return this legacy. The man who signed Medicare into law, and originally the plan was to expand it year by year. We're going to finish the job that LBJ set out for us with this great society.
He was a tragic figure. I think when he really realized what he'd done in Vietnam, I think it killed him. I think he had a heart attack. Now, of course, wasn't his ranch somewhere near where?
Yeah, not so near the Pedernales. Yeah. Not far away.
Yeah. Now, you yourself are in a biracial marriage, aren't you, Mike?
Certainly, yeah.
You yourself have a Black son. Talk to me, not only as a politician, but as a father. What are your thoughts about what's going on right now? Black Lives Matter, the murder charges that were brought today against the officer who killed Rayshard Brooks, and a statistic that I heard from you, which was that every 32 hours, it's a stunning, horrifyingly stunning statistic, that every 32 hours, a Black man or woman is shot in America by the police. Tell us your thoughts about all this.
Well, that's what brings me to this. I don't necessarily have this dying ambition to run for office, but when Trump was elected and Michael McCall was writing the Muslim ban and, presiding over the family separation policy, and I was actually at the city of Austin at that point suing the governor to stop this anti-immigrant law.
Because you are a civil rights lawyer, correct?
Yeah, and I've been involved with movement cases. I've sued police for racist policies that encourage racial profiling. But I figured, let's stand up. Let's put a different vision of Texas forward. And some of this is just high-minded thinking, like yourself, like a lot of the people who are watching right now. We love our fellow man, our fellow woman, and we want the best for everyone. And
if you're from Texas, it's very difficult for you to shut up.
Exactly right. But I do have this vested personal interest, and part of the story is that I fell in love in Houston, Texas, the summer of 1999. I was training to be a teacher. I met my wife, Hindatu, who was born in Nigeria. And here we are, 21 years later, still making it work. And we've got two beautiful children, including an 8-year-old daughter, a 4-year-old son, who are Black, as perceived as Black by society. And, it really came home for me with the killing of George Floyd, because, he was killed about a so-called counterfeit $20 bill, right? The store called the police to say, we have a forgery in progress. And the bill looks like something that I actually have in my possession, which is a fake $20 bill. And I'm not a forger, but the way I got this bill was from my daughter, who's a Girl Scout, who was selling cookies this spring, and if anyone's had a Girl Scout at home, the parents buy the boxes and then the girl sells them, right? And so my wife went to deposit the money we had raised and noticed this fake bill. And it was actually sitting on my desk when I heard about the George Floyd story. And it brought home so many different thoughts, right? I mean, first of all, to acknowledge that, if I had gone to the store and tried to buy cigarettes or whatever it was George Floyd bought with a $20 bill like that, there's no chance my neck would have been on the asphalt on a Minneapolis street. There's no chance that the store would have even called the police. It would have been like, oh, sorry, that was a mistake. I don't know how I got that. And then, a second layer.
Falling asleep at Wendy's.
Oh, all these stories. But then the second thought I had was, well, my daughter had this bill in her hand. What if she had gone to the store to buy something? Okay, she's 8 years old. Maybe she would not have been perceived as a threat. But if she had been 10 or 12, at what point does your skin color alone suffice to be a threat to somebody in this country? And the idea that such, awful bias and prejudice comes into policing every day, that a man like George Floyd, who actually himself has these Houston roots, beloved in the Houston community, just known as a wonderful human being, the idea that he has to face death by a police officer just by making maybe even an honest mistake is just obscene. And so, I mean, we
All right.
obviously have to fight white supremacy.
So you're elected congressman. What are you going to do? What do you want Congress to do? What are the changes you want to see happen?
I mean, first, to confront white supremacy, the legacy of slavery, the 401-year history in this country head on, to call it out, to name it, to recognize that it's at the foundation of our policing system. The so-called slave patrols in the South were some of the first police officers we had, to recognize that it comes out in all these other effects. The people who are most likely to have COVID-19 are Black men and women, primarily in the South. The people who are most likely to work these frontline jobs that are exposed to the virus, Black men and Black women. And so we're oppressing folks on every front, whether it's the criminal justice system, the economic system, our healthcare. And so we need to have a holistic approach. Now, in terms of the police, I think we can redefine public safety. We don't need an officer with a gun to respond to every emergency. We can have crisis counselors, we can have conflict resolution specialists. There's all sorts of people that can respond to a lot of those calls to reduce even the potential for a confrontation. But let's just recognize the racist roots of this country and let's take it head on and confront it. I mean, that was one of the things I really appreciated about your presidential campaign, that debate, when you just called it out. I mean, some folks are scared to say the word reparations, but all this wealth was accumulated on the backs of slavery and Jim Crow, and what are we going to do about it?
And until we pay reparations, and we're not going to even begin to close that economic gap, and that economic gap has a lot to do, poverty has a lot to do with the fact that there is a higher rate of diabetes, a higher rate of obesity, a higher rate of heart disease, et cetera, which has to do with the fact that Black people have the higher incidence of COVID. We have to go beyond the kneel. We have to go beyond the kente cloth. We have to get into actual change. And I know, of course, what the Republican Senate did today, no actual outlawing of chokeholds. I mean, it's just all these little incremental changes. And that's what I appreciate about a candidate like you. Martin Luther King said, we must avoid the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. We need the actual progressives who will go in there and move beyond the tiny steps that too many people within the Democratic establishment still seem to think, despite all evidence, is the way to beat Republicans.
No, that's right. This is our moment as progressives, with people with vision and with a commitment to lasting structural change. One of the things that we're going to confront in the next session, and I plan to be there, and it looks like Joe Biden is going to be our president, and we're going to have to push him, right? And if we go back to LBJ and the Great Society programs, those happened because MLK and all these millions of people were in the streets because there was that mass pressure to make things happen.
And MLK apologized to JFK. He said, "I'm sorry, I've had to say some rough things about you." And JFK said, "Please do, it's my cover."
No, that's the way we need to do it. And we need to bring the streets into the Capitol. And, these moderate Democrats are going to be preaching about cutting the deficit, before we know.
This is why it's, as I say here on the summit all the time, it's not just about voting blue. It's about realizing there are shades of blue.
Right.
And some of these conservative Democrats, some of these moderate Democrats, they're enablers to the Republicans. They're enablers to the president. And Martin Luther King talked about that as well, about the white moderate being such an obstruction. I want everybody to know that Mike's website is Siegel. SiegelForTexas.org, SIEGELFOR, Texas.org, SiegelForTexas.org. I'm so aware, everybody, that if everybody who watches this summit even sent in $1, then the people, these marvelous candidates, would have a really nice evening. So if you're moved by Mike, as I'm sure you are, I certainly am, and if you really want to see Texas go blue and move in another direction, then please do what you can, even if it's $5, even if whatever it is. Let this man know tonight at SiegelForTexas.org. Also, you can go to ProgressiveCandidateSummit.com and you can see the donate button there as well. Mike, we have a couple of people who would like to ask you questions. Is that okay with you?
Perfect.
Okay. I'd like to bring into the room Juliet Simmons. Juliet, join us in the Zoom room, and please unmute your uh, box when you do.
Hello.
Hi,
Hi.
how are you?
Good. Thank you for hosting this and having Mike on.
Sure.
Mike, you talked a little earlier about voter suppression. Can you tell us more about what you're doing as a candidate to help fight that, and then also what you think Congress should be doing and how you plan to work on it once you're there?
Right on. This is like such a key issue. So thank you, Juliet. I mean, the most important right in a democratic society is the right to vote. You know, that's kind of the foundational right that makes all this, the rest of it possible. And, you know, for me, fighting voter suppression in Texas has been a fundamental issue for me. I mean, it does draw my background as a civil rights lawyer and as a candidate. And in 2018, when I was running, we had a huge issue at an historically Black college in Texas, Prairie View A&M University in Waller County. You know, in the spring, it looks kind of like this picture behind me, but this is a college that was built on a former slave plantation in Waller County. And when we lowered the voting age in Texas, or sorry, in the United States from 21 to 18, the students started voting. This is back in the 60s.
Wow.
But the local officials said, no, thank you. We don't want you to vote us out. And basically told the students they couldn't vote. They weren't residents of the county. Those students in 1969 won a Supreme Court case that established the right to vote for every college student in this country where you attend school. So that's the legacy in this district. Now, fast forward to 2018, the students were told again they can't vote. This was some absurd reason, you know, they had registered the wrong way. They had registered the right way, the way they were told to register by the county. And my campaign got involved. I did something that was pretty basic. I wrote a letter, but I had my organizer bring it to the county judge. And my organizer was actually arrested when this happened. He was surrounded by officers. They said, why are you doing this? I'm working for a campaign. Who's that candidate for? He said a Democrat, and they actually arrested him. But like that one incident got to appear on the Rachel Maddow show to tell the story, but also brought attention to the issue and actually forced the state to reverse the decision. And so, you know, they say democracy dies in darkness, and all of these vote suppression tactics, they work best when there's not a light being shined.
That's right.
So to me, the job is to lift up all these instances of voter suppression against naturalized citizens, that they target Mexican Americans, against Black folks, against old folks, young folks. I mean, they've got a tactic for everybody in Texas. And so we need to strengthen the Voting Rights Act. You know, the Supreme Court weakened it. We need to make sure that states like Texas actually have to have their laws approved by the federal government before they go into effect to make sure they're not suppressing the vote. But to me, this is such an easy issue. It's like, yes, this is a democracy. Everyone should vote. But of course, Texas Republicans have other ideas.
Well, American Republicans have other ideas, and they admit, even the president admits, that if more people vote, they lose. That's why he's trying to get rid of vote by mail. I don't know if you're aware of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dissent in the 2013 Supreme Court case, where John Roberts and others weakened the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which of course, once again, Johnson signed. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dissent was wonderful. She said, wait a minute, it was raining. We built a really strong umbrella. You're now saying, because he said, oh, the South is different now. So she said, so wait, what are you saying here? She's saying, you're saying it was raining, but we weren't getting wet. And it's been so long since we got wet that we don't need a strong umbrella anymore. She said, you're gonna put holes in the umbrella. It will rain on us again. And as is usually the case, boy, was she right.
No, it's such a shame. I mean, Texas has been found guilty of racial discrimination in voting laws dozens of times in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. It's a voter ID law. It's closing early voting locations for seniors. It's just, you run down the list, and they keep getting away with it because our Supreme Court takes 60 cases a year. The appellate court is extremely conservative. And so it's almost like the law doesn't matter right now. And that's one of the extreme dangers we're in, right?
Well, that starts at the top with the president. Let me ask you a question. If you're there, if the Democrats keep the House, if the Democrats take the Senate, will they just repass the Voting Rights Act legislatively, and that will fix this?
That would be an extreme help. We would open up hearings to prove that all those states that used to be in the pre-clearance program, that they're still suppressing the vote. And so we just showed the video from Georgia from last week, right? Those lines that were miles long. I mean, we've got similar stories in Texas. We basically need to create a new record because as you mentioned, Justice Roberts said, oh, that was 50 years ago. But the evidence is there. So we just need to hold the hearing, put the evidence in, and reinstate that provision of the law.
Well, I get excited just hearing you talk about what could happen if you guys get in there. Juliet, do you have any other questions for Mike?
No, I appreciate you once again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's such a big issue, voter suppression, Mike. It's like you said, if the vote is suppressed, our democracy is down. I mean, I think a lot of us have deep concerns about the election in November, even on the presidential level. Greg Palast and people like him, we have reason for concern. We have somebody else who'd like to ask you questions, a woman named Catherine Rogers. Catherine, come into the Zoom room and please unmute yourself so that you can meet Mike. Hi, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Ask away.
Well, Mike, one thing I'm curious about is, Texas is huge with the oil and gas business, but you've been very courageous about promoting the Green New Deal. And I'm wondering why you have made it such a priority, given that it might cost you support from fossil fuel workers and donors.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, that's been probably the leading issue for me in this 2020 campaign. And I will say, and Marianne, you won't be surprised, when I went to Washington, D.C. last year to share my plan for my campaign and had my first flyer, it said Medicare for all, Green New Deal, end the war on drugs, fight voter suppression. They were like, no, don't say that. Don't say those three words.
They won't have any of that. They think going Republican light is the way to beat the Republican.
But
all evidence.
I mean, first of all, I have to wake up each day and do this, and I wouldn't be taking time away from my wife and kids if I didn't believe in what I was doing. But also, I think this is good politics to fight for our planet, to fight for a multi-million jobs program that's going to rebuild our country, build a renewable economy, take care of fossil fuel workers as we transition over to renewable energy.
I'd like to stay with that for a moment because I think a lot of people aren't as clear about that. People say, what about the thousands of people who work for the oil and gas industry? And they're right. That's why the term is often used to just transition. But those same talents and skills at manufacturing, engineering, et cetera, these people should be first in line, and the US government should not let any of them drop through the cracks, right? But that's part of the plan for a Green New Deal, correct?
It's essential. And really, the Green New Deal is a jobs program, kind of like the original New Deal, to respond to the Depression. And we're actually in another one. So it's the perfect time for this. And we basically need to let the workers know that we're going to make sure they're taken care of. And some unions, like electrical workers, will do great with the new renewable energies, the wind farms, the solar. Some of the folks who operate coal plants, we might just need to pay them out, to basically have them take an early retirement. And we do need to take care of each sector, but big picture, workers shouldn't suffer for this decision we're making, and we need to make that clear. This is a macroeconomic decision. It's what's best for the planet, what's best for our economy. And if we spend this money, it used to be, how are you going to pay for it? Of course, during this economic crisis, they've given $4 trillion to the wealthiest corporations, no interest loans. So we know we can afford it. But this investment will be so much better than tax cuts for the wealthy, because when you create good new working class union jobs, that supports the local community, the local small businesses. And so to me, this is the leading progressive response to this crisis we're in right now. Let's address climate change. Let's have clean air and clean water. Let's enjoy our blue bonnets here in Texas. But let's also have a national jobs program that will rebuild our country and create some real social equality.
Well, this radical idea from Abraham Lincoln, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, is not just a utopian concept. It's not just the philosophical ideal of the Declaration of Independence. It's also good economics. You take care of people. The idea that helping people and planet and animals, I think, thrive is actually the way to stimulate your economy, as opposed to allowing your policies to be guided by the notion of short-term profits for huge multinational corporations in Texas or anywhere else. I don't care how rich you are living in Texas. You might be in River Oaks or whatever. How many floods can you take?
Right, exactly. The New Deal was such an amazing program, the Works Progress Administration. I mean, so much of our infrastructure still dates back to that. And it was also culture. They wrote down these oral histories from folks from these certain communities in the Georgia coastlands. I mean, there were so many aspects to it. There was actually a Green New Deal project in every congressional district in the country. And so to me, if we can kind of make that more real for folks, this will benefit you directly. It's a national jobs program. It helps the planet, but it also helps your community. That's when it's going to sell a little more. And that's what FDR did originally. He was just saying New Deal, New Deal, New Deal all the time.
And he wanted
hopefully,
a workers' bill of rights.
exactly. And so hopefully we can get Joe Biden to say those words a few times.
Well, we'll have to keep pushing him. And with you in Congress, Joe, the progressives. Catherine, what do you do?
I'm a writer and an editor. I mainly work on educational materials, language arts textbooks.
Any thoughts about the educational system that you want to share with Mike?
Well, one reason I support Mike is that he's been a teacher himself, and he is very supportive of a good education, an equal education, an education that'll serve us all and help improve America, frankly, make students, give them the skills they need to succeed, and America, the workers that it needs to succeed.
Do you want to see free college tuition at state colleges and universities, Mike?
Yes, certainly.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Removal of the college loan debt?
Yeah, we should wipe it out. That would be by itself the best stimulus bill you could pass.
I know it's $1.5 trillion that those kids are holding.
Yeah, I mean, I'm holding it myself. Being a city attorney, civil rights lawyer doesn't pay as well as some of those corporate jobs, but yeah, no, that would be a tremendous investment. And truthfully, public schools and the postal service, those are like the biggest successes of public programs. Even in the rural counties that are 80% Republican, they love their public schools. They don't want charter schools. They don't want privatization. They don't want vouchers. They just want us to take care of the public schools. And so to me, to invest in teachers, to invest in the American dream, the idea that no matter who you are, where you're from, if you go to school, work hard, you have opportunity. I mean, we need to get back to that in this country.
Well, I'm a product of the Texas public school system. And one of the things that has bothered me a lot, and Catherine, I'm curious about your thoughts about this, ever since the early part of this century, when STEM became such an issue and there was such an emphasis on science and technology and engineering and math, I think that this is, although well-intentioned, has had a very debilitating effect. Because there's been a de-emphasis on history, a de-emphasis on culture and art, and a de-emphasis on civics and government. We have 11 states in the United States that don't even require half a year of civics. And of course, we all know about the Texas school board case. And I don't think we would have the Trump phenomenon if it weren't for the fact that too many Americans don't, if you're not taught what the Bill of Rights is as a child, you don't know when you're an adult to be horrified when somebody's assaulting it.
Yeah, people's ability to understand arguments and see when they're being misled is very disheartening to me. I used to teach rhetoric, and the fallacies that go around, and the arguments that people make that are just, I feel like if people had a little bit more of a liberal arts education, they would understand when they're being lied to more.
Critical thought. This is why Thomas Jefferson said that we needed public education. He said that people having the capacity for critical thought was necessary for a people who were there to govern themselves. And you're absolutely correct. How easily people are duped, how easily disinformation. It's not just that so much disinformation is out there, it's how vulnerable people are to it in ways, as you're saying, Catherine, that I don't think intelligent people should be. A real education is more than just learning facts. So I'm with you. There's so much radical change that's necessary. And I also believe that we need to stop being afraid of the word radical. The very notion of America is radical. That all men are created equal is radical. That all men are created with inalienable rights is radical. That governments are instituted to secure those rights is radical. And that the people have the right to alter or abolish that government if it's not doing its job is radical. I think we've lost our emotional and psychological bonding with those principles that, yeah, they're radical. That's why they have changed the world.
And life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? I mean, to build on what you're saying, how come we don't value happiness in this country? All this treating students like cogs in a machine, this industrial model of education. And, half the schools, they don't even teach art anymore. I mean, how much does art do to your brain to help you understand the world, other cultures? And, we are wealthy enough as a country that we don't need to be working 60-hour weeks. We could work less, write more poetry, go fishing, enjoy the great outdoors. I mean, we should be fighting for happiness for people. And to me, if we actually can communicate that message, that would be winning
Well,
ticket.
we need you, when you're in Congress, to do more than communicate the message. We need you to change the policies. Every school in America should be a palace of learning and culture and the arts. There are tens of millions of people in the United States who live in chronic economic tension and anxiety. Even before COVID, we had 93 million people living near poverty. We have 13 million children in the United States who even before COVID were going to school hungry. And as you said, so where's the right to pursue happiness? And I particularly feel strongly about this in relation to our children, Mike. That's why I think we need an entire Department of Children and Youth. Children are not old enough to vote. So they're not a constituency, and they're not old enough to work, so they don't have any financial leverage. And they are consistently given mere lip service by our political establishment. And too often that's as true within the Democratic Party as within the Republicans. So Catherine, thank you for bringing it up. And you're there, you're in Texas. When Mike gets to Washington, we'll be counting on people like you. We need to not only push Joe Biden, we need to push Mike Siegel, right? And make sure he doesn't forget what he said, right?
Oh, he won't.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you for being here.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.
Mike, let's talk about some international issues, if that's okay. You know, one of the reasons we're doing the summit is because I think a lot of people, you know, we know the presidential candidates, but too often we really don't know our congressional candidates. And even if we know them in our district or our state, we tend to think somebody else's, you know, if I don't live in Texas, why should I care about Mike Siegel? But I think this whole political awakening means that people are realizing that if you go to Washington, you're going to vote on bills and legislation that affects all of our lives, whether we live in Texas or not. I saw today, of course, the drama today has to do with John Bolton's book. His saying that the president had actually asked Xi of China to help him with the election. Do you have any thoughts about foreign affairs that you'd like to share with the audience?
Oh, certainly. So, I mean, I'm running to replace the ranking Republican on the Foreign Affairs Committee, McCall.
Are you now?
You know, xenophobic, anti-Islamic, anti-Chinese, anti-immigrant. And to me, you know, when I came out of law school, I was hoping to be a human rights lawyer. Now, there's not a lot of jobs to be a human rights lawyer out there. But so, you know, to me, democracy, human rights, diplomacy, this should be the foundation to, you know, to build an international community, you know, common goals and objectives, to hold each other accountable as a global community and to lift each other up. And so many of these issues we're confronting, whether it's climate change or immigration or, you know, the corruption of our government with how he deals with foreign countries, it comes back to these issues of democracy and human rights and foreign affairs. And so to me, obviously it's disgusting that the president would abuse his office to seek political favors, to endorse the basically the genocide of the Uyghur people, you know, these Muslim people in China.
Yes, actually, Bolton says in his book, apparently, that the president wasn't just willing to look away. He actually told the Chinese he was in support of the camps, according to Bolton.
And we have to recognize that Trump has his own camps here, right? Women and men seeking asylum that he's locked up.
Now, when it comes to Hong Kong, I suppose he did the right thing by taking away a most favored status. Do you have any thoughts about Hong Kong?
You know, I support democracy everywhere. I'm skeptical of how the Republicans are so focused on Hong Kong. It's like they support democracy in Hong Kong, but not here at home. But certainly we have to have these common standards that we're going to push internationally: democracy, civil society, protection of journalists, free speech. You know, we have to have, you know, a universal approach. And whether it's Israel, Palestine, Hong Kong, China, in this country, we have to apply these and support these universal standards.
You know, if you go, when you go into the House, Barbara Lee is still sponsoring a bill that's been around for a long time, originally by Dennis Kucinich, for a Department of Peace. I don't know if you've read Ronan Farrow's book, The War on Peace, but the book really tracks the way in the last few decades we have taken so much of what used to be the core work of the State Department and turned it over to military as opposed to diplomats. This is one of the areas where we have just blown apart the institutions that were the steady state. No, not the deep state, but the steady state. A Department of Peace seems so important to me. When you have a $760 billion defense budget, only a $40 billion budget at state, only $17 billion for the USAID, You know, there are, I don't know if you're aware, Mike, but there are 4 factors which, when present, statistically indicate there will be a greater incidence of peace and a lower incidence of conflict. And that is expanded economic opportunities for women, expanded educational opportunities for children,
Mm,
a reduction of violence against women,
mm.
and the amelioration of human despair. And this is as true whether you're talking about a corner in Texas or whether you're talking about another corner of the world, that we could proactively wage peace.
Certainly, and I absolutely support Congresswoman Barbalie's bill, and to basically separate that money and give it a different mission, right? Because even in under the USAID programs, they'll often be like, "We're going to give you $1 billion to buy products from U.S. companies." Like,
That's right.
call it foreign aid, but it's really aid to the corporation. And so certainly we need to focus on peace, on developing civil society, whether it's in Central America or elsewhere. I mean, we need to be building peaceful institutions. And I think there's a clear analogy to this conversation about the police in this country, right? And there are these hashtags out there, defund the police and so forth. And I'm not using those as my campaign because, for one, I don't think voters understand what they mean. But I will say, as someone who has sued the police on behalf of youth who are facing racial profiling, these resources are tremendously abused. And the more it's like you give someone a hammer and they start looking for nails. And we just keep pumping money into police in schools, so-called gang programs, all these different programs that just increase the oppression. And if we actually invested in housing, getting people jobs, getting people mental health care, letting them see a doctor, that's going to reduce crime, reduce violence. And so in the same way that we need a Department of Peace for international affairs, we need to have, departments
Well,
of
no, the
locally as
Department
well.
of Peace concept, as I have talked about it, would have a domestic as well as international component. If you have someone, let's say, who is an expert in conflict resolution, somebody's specialty might be gang members in East Los Angeles, somebody else's specialty might be the Congo. It's the same principle, but applied in different ways. And as you said, the problem is the same. And also the realization that everybody's so upset about this defund the police, but where was all the outrage as they've been defunding Head Start and defunding education and defunding the EPA and defunding housing? So that right there, you see the selective outrage when we start taking money away from anybody.
And we need to call that out. Who are the police protecting? What is their mission? And are they just maintaining the existing unjust social order? Then maybe we need to look at other solutions, right? And the fact that we allow women to die in childbirth in Texas at rates approaching so-called third world nations, right? The fact that people
have women in prisons in chains giving birth, they won't take the chains off the woman while she's in giving birth.
And people dying of hunger. I mean, so all these deaths are occurring. Why is there only focus on potential deaths if we take away some police officers versus all the people who are actually dying because they don't have enough food?
Well, I saw a quote the other day from James Comey, and he said, if you will take social workers and conflict resolution experts and nonviolent communicators and give a large part of the police work to them, what has formerly been known as police work, he said that would only make the serious issues that have where brute force is appropriate, we would even do a better job. We would be glad to have those other things taken off the table. And I think I've seen even Bratton in New York is saying, you're hearing some pretty surprising places, institutional forces now acknowledging that the conversation is a legitimate one. Is that just wishful thinking on my part that it means something? Or do you agree with me that we're seeing a sea change here and openness in places that we had not seen it before?
I think we have a lot of potential in this moment. And I think the choice we're going to have is to accept a few modest reforms or keep pushing. I mean, I think the Brattons of the world would like us to ban chokeholds and create maybe a database for officer abuse and then go home. But we need to keep pushing. I like what the Minneapolis City Council is doing. Like, we're going to completely
You're gone. You're out. It's over. Well, I think the Rayshard Brooks, really, that killing just proves that the system is irrevocably broken.
I mean,
And
if a
it's not
person's
just a
asleep
few
in a
bad
Wendy's
apples.
parking lot, like, why not send a social worker? Do a wellness check. Don't send someone with a gun.
When I was growing up, there was a show, Andy Griffith, in Mayberry. I'm sure that's way ahead of your time. But you
Couple
look at it now, and that's kind of what the police, peacekeepers, and of course the whole idea of the militarization of the police, the fact, like that song, "Got to Move These MTVs," right? What were the Sultans of Swing? And that's exactly what's happening. So you have these defense contractors okay, their stuff was used in Afghanistan, or the stuff was used in Iraq, the stuff was used somewhere, and then they come around to the Pentagon the next year and they say, "We got to give you the newest model. Why don't you take those old ones and send them to the boys back home?"
Right.
So, and even the training, you can even see it from some of the body language in these protests, where these police have clearly been trained to treat the population, the domestic population, like an enemy. When
Yeah.
that is, I understand why someone in the military needs to be trained to
Right.
kill if necessary. That I understand. But these guys are here to serve and protect, and something has gone fundamentally wrong.
Now it's kind of like this, what Eisenhower warned us about, right? The military
Military
industrial complex. And, police are trained by Israeli Defense Force, contractors. I mean, we're bringing all this military methodology to policing, predominantly Black and brown
As though the United States is occupied territory,
communities.
treating them as an occupied population. I think people are awakening right now that this is a fundamental problem that needs a fundamental pattern disruption, not just a little bit of incremental change here and a little bit of incremental change there. I hope that Joe Biden gets the message. I hope that we can continue to push on that. And I hope that when you get to Congress, you will continue to push, even though you will be there as a Democrat, and there will be Democratic leadership trying to get you to soften your tone a little bit. This is not a
Yeah.
moment to soften your tone.
No.
This
I-
is,
If I have to be there for one term, so be it. I mean, we got to do what's right and fight the good fight, no
oh,
doubt.
I think Texans like Texans who say what they think. I think sometimes other people don't, but you're running in Texas. Okay, everybody, you heard it right here. This is Mike Siegel. He's running for District 10 in Texas. His website is Siegel for Texas, Siegel for Texas, FOR Texas.org. You can also see at the progressivecandidatesummit.com. And as I was mentioning, and I hope you will look at these other wonderful candidates as well. If you sent $1, if everybody's watching right now, just send anything. It takes money, and it's public knowledge. So I can tell you that Michael McCall, who is the conservative Republican who is serving in this seat right now, who has been there since 2004. That right there means time to, generations come and generations go on this earth, and generations should come and generations should go in Congress as well. He is one of the wealthiest members of the US Congress. He has hundreds of millions of dollars at his disposal. If we want these progressive candidates, I know I don't need Mike to say he's not taking corporate PAC money, because the corporate PACs aren't going to want to give Mike Siegel money. So whenever I hear these progressives say we're not taking that, I'm like, yeah, well, they wouldn't want to give it to you.
Right.
The point is, if we want Mike Siegel to win, we're going to have to pay for it. And so I ask you who are moved and who do want to see Texas go as blue as those blue bonnets behind him, to do what you can and support his campaign, Siegel4Texas.com. Mike, you have any final words to share with our audience before we leave tonight?
Well, thank you so much for sharing the stage with me, Marianne, and for all of your work to lift us up. I mean, I think you sent one email to benefit my campaign earlier, and it paid for, let's just say, 10,000 phone calls. I mean, the support you've provided has really been an amazing boost. And, we're running an efficient campaign. We're not hiring these high-priced consultants. So best believe that every dollar will be put to good use.
That makes me very happy. And I hope all of you are texting your friends. This interview will remain. It will be on my Instagram page, on Facebook, on Twitter. So it will be there. YouTube, send it to your friends. Tell people about it. Think about who you might know in Texas. And also, Wendy wants to make sure that I say once again, it's Siegel4Texas.org, not that.
If you can spell the name right, you're halfway there.
That's right, Siegel.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody, I want to thank you for being with us tonight. Tomorrow night, we have a senatorial candidate. I'm sure that you share the hopes of millions that Susan Collins will now get to enjoy a lovely retirement, and we can get a Democratic senator there this year. Let's make it a woman. Let's make it Betsy Sweet, who is an old friend of mine, actually. I met her when she was running in another race. I look forward to seeing her tomorrow night. The next night, on Friday, we have a woman who I have not met, but I'm fascinated by her. Her name is Lisa Ring. So make sure you'll be here Friday night, and then Saturday night, another wonderful progressive running in California, Liam O'Mara. Check out the progressivecandidatesummit.com site. You'll see a lot of great endorsees there. Do what you can. This is a moment of great change, and we're all co-creating it together. Use your voice, use your platform, use your feet, and more than anything, use your vote. Thank you very, very much, Mike Siegel. I wish you the very best. I can't wait to see you again when you're congressman from Texas District 10. God bless everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.